Once upon a time, in the peaceful village of Eziakwu, there was a sacred river named Aji that flowed through the heart of the land. The villagers believed that the river was the home of a powerful river god named Obinna. Every year, they would offer gifts of yams, kola nuts, and songs to honor Obinna, who in return ensured that their crops grew lush and the rains came on time. For many generations, the people of Eziakwu thrived under the blessings of the river god, never wanting for food or water. However, there came a time when a new king, King Chima, ascended to the throne. Unlike his father, King Chima cared little for the old traditions. His heart was filled with greed, and he believed that the river could serve a greater purpose than merely nourishing the land. He ordered his men to build a dam to block the river's flow, capturing the water to control its use and to sell it to nearby villages. The more wealth he gathered, the more he desired. The villagers protested, begging him to reconsider. The river belongs to the god Obinna, they pleaded. If you disrupt its flow, the land will suffer. But King Chima waved their concerns away with a greedy hand. The river is mine to control, he declared, and with its wealth, Eziakwu will grow even stronger. Soon, the river's once strong current slowed to a trickle. The fields began to dry, and the rains no longer came. Crops withered under the scorching sun, and the animals that once roamed the lush land grew thin and frail. The people of Eziakwu suffered, but King Chima grew richer with every passing day as other villages came to buy the precious water he hoarded. What the king did not know was that Obinna, the river god, had been watching all along. Furious at the king's greed and disrespect, Obinna sought revenge. He could no longer allow the balance of nature to be disturbed. It was then that the god decided to intervene. Far from the palace, in a small hut at the edge of the village, lived a young maiden named Ada. She was known throughout the village for her kindness and beauty, but more so for her deep connection to the land and the river. Even when the river began to dry, Ada would visit its banks, kneeling in prayer for the return of the water that had once sustained her people. She was the first to bring offerings of yams and flowers, even though others had stopped believing. One evening, as Ada knelt beside the river's thin stream, a soft voice called her name. Startled, she looked around, but saw no one. Ada. The voice echoed again, this time from the water itself. Her heart pounded in her chest as the water in the river began to swirl and glow with a soft blue light. Rising from the depths of the river came a figure, tall and majestic, with eyes that shimmered like moonlight on the water's surface. It was Obinna, the river god. Ada, Obinna spoke, his voice like the gentle rush of a stream. You have been faithful to me even when others have turned away. I have chosen you to bear a son who will restore the balance to this land and release the river once more. Ada's eyes widened in disbelief. But how, she asked. I am just a simple maiden. What can I do against the power of the king? Obinna smiled softly. It is not you who will bring down the king, but the child you will bear. He will be born with my gifts, and when the time comes, he will free the river and return life to your people. But beware, the king's magic is strong, and he will not easily give up his power. You must be brave, Ada, for your child's journey will not be easy. Before she could respond, Obinna reached out, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. A warm, soothing energy flowed through her, and in that moment, Ada knew that she had been chosen for a great and difficult task. As the river god disappeared back into the depths, she stood up, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. Weeks passed, and soon Ada began to notice the signs of her pregnancy. At first, she kept the news to herself, uncertain of how the villagers would react. But as her belly grew, so did the whispers among the people. How could she be with child when she has no husband? They gossiped. Some accused her of dishonoring the village, while others believed she had been cursed. Despite the rumors, Ada remained silent, knowing that her child's true purpose was far greater than what the others could understand. She spent her days at the river's edge, speaking to Obinna and preparing herself for the day her child would be born. One stormy night, as thunder cracked across the sky, Ada went into labor. Alone in her small hut, she gave birth to a son, a child unlike any other. His skin had a faint glow, as if touched by the light of the moon, and his eyes sparkled with the deep, mysterious blue of the river's waters. She named him Naji, which meant child of strength, for she knew that he would need great strength to fulfill his destiny. From the moment of his birth, strange things began to happen. The rains, which had been absent for so long, returned, drenching the dry earth. The river's flow, though still weak, seemed to regain some of its former life. But with this new hope came a growing fear, for King Chima had heard rumors of a child born under mysterious circumstances, one that could threaten his reign. And so, as Naji grew, so did the king's watchful eye on Ada and her son. As Naji grew from a baby into a young boy, the people of Eziaqua could not help but notice his unusual nature. While the other children played by the riverbanks or ran through the dusty fields, Naji was often found sitting quietly by the water's edge, his eyes fixed on the sluggish current of the Aji River. Sometimes, when no one was watching, the river would respond to him, its surface rippling gently as if greeting an old friend. One day, as Naji sat by the river, a group of boys from the village approached him. "Why are you always sitting here by the dead river, Naji?" one of them sneered. "It doesn't flow anymore. You should be playing with us instead." But before Naji could respond, the river did something no one had seen in years. A sudden burst of water shot up from the surface, spraying the boys with a cool, refreshing mist. They yelped in surprise, scrambling back in fear. "Did you see that?" one of them cried. "How did he do that?" The boys ran off, leaving Naji alone once again. But this time, he wasn't afraid of his power. He had felt something deep within him stir, something connected to the river and its ancient strength. He smiled to himself, knowing that the river god's gifts were beginning to awaken within him. As the years passed, Naji's abilities grew stronger. He could command small streams of water with a mere flick of his hand, and on rare occasions he could summon rain from the clouds with just a thought. Though Ada tried to keep his powers hidden from the village, it wasn't long before word of Naji's abilities spread. Some villagers began to see him as a miracle, while others viewed him with suspicion. But no one was more concerned than King Chima. In the grand palace, King Chima paced back and forth, his mind troubled by the rumors he had been hearing. His trusted advisors had informed him of a boy with strange powers connected to the river. The king had long since abandoned the village's old beliefs in the river god, but the thought of someone challenging his rule made him uneasy. How could this be? King Chima muttered to himself. "I control the river. I have tamed it for my wealth. No boy, no matter how special, can undo what I have done." Yet, deep down, the king knew that something was wrong. Since the boy's birth, the river had shown signs of life, small but unmistakable. The rains had started to return, and the fields were not as dry as they once were. Worse still, the people were whispering about the possibility of change. Some had even dared to hope that the river might flow freely again. The king called for his most trusted advisor, a dark sorcerer named Anazi. Anazi was known throughout the land for his knowledge of ancient magic and dark arts, and King Chima had relied on him many times to maintain his power. "Anazi," the king began, his voice cold, "I have heard disturbing news. A boy in the village claims to have powers connected to the river. Tell me, is there a threat to my rule?" Anazi's eyes narrowed as he listened. "A boy with powers, you say? That could only mean one thing, my king. The river god Obina has chosen this boy. His birth must have been foretold by the old prophecies." The king clenched his fists. "I will not let a child take what I have built. If this boy truly has the river god's favor, then he must be dealt with." Anazi smiled darkly. "Leave it to me, your majesty. I will find a way to break the boy's connection to the river. But we must be careful. The river god's power is ancient and strong. We must not act recklessly." The king nodded. "Do whatever you must. Just make sure the boy never fulfills his destiny." Back in her small hut, Ada sensed the danger that was growing around her son. She knew that King Chima would not stand idly by as Naji's powers grew stronger. Every day, she prayed to Obina for guidance, knowing that her son's destiny was fast approaching. One evening, as the sun set over the dry fields, Ada had a vision. In it, she saw a dark figure standing in the shadows, watching Naji with cold, calculating eyes. The figure's hands glowed with a dark magic, and Ada knew at once that this was the sorcerer Anazi. When the vision faded, Ada rushed to her son's side. Naji, now a young teenager, was sitting by the river as usual, his eyes glowing with a soft blue light as he practiced his powers. "Naji," Ada whispered urgently, "you must be careful. The king has learned of your abilities, and he will stop at nothing to keep his hold on the river. There is a dark sorcerer in his court, a man named Anazi, who will try to harm you." Naji looked up at his mother, his expression serious. "I'm not afraid, mother. I can feel the river's strength inside me. It is as if the water speaks to me, guiding me. I know that my time is coming." Ada knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are strong, Naji, but the king's magic is powerful. You must learn to control your gifts fully before you face him. The river god will help you, but you must be prepared for the challenges ahead." Naji nodded, his resolve growing. "I will train harder, mother. I will not let the king destroy what is left of the river. I will fulfill my destiny." As they stood by the river, the soft glow of moonlight reflected off the water, casting a peaceful light over the land. But Ada knew that peace would not last for long. A storm was brewing, and Naji would soon have to face the greatest test of his life. In the quiet village of Eziakwu, life continued as usual, but an undercurrent of tension rippled through the air. The people whispered of a boy born of the river, whose powers could save them all. But while many hoped for salvation, some feared the change Naji might bring. The old ways had been buried under the weight of King Chima's rule for so long that even the mere thought of challenging him was terrifying. One evening, as Naji sat by the river, deep in meditation, a strange chill crept over the air. The river, which had once been calm, began to stir with unease. Naji's eyes flickered open, sensing the shift. He could feel something approaching, something dark and malevolent. The trees around him seemed to whisper warnings as the wind picked up. Suddenly, the air grew heavy, and the once faint sound of footsteps echoed louder in the distance. Naji stood up, turning toward the direction of the sound. From the shadows emerged a tall figure draped in a black robe, his face obscured by a hood. In his hands, he carried a staff that glowed with a faint, unnatural light. It was Anazi, the king's sorcerer. "I have heard much about you, boy," Anazi said, his voice cold and smooth, like the hiss of a serpent. "They say you have been touched by the river god himself. But tell me, do you really think you can stand against the might of King Chima?" Naji narrowed his eyes but stood his ground. "I don't seek to fight the king," he replied. "I only wish to restore the balance of the land. The river belongs to the people, not to the king." Anazi chuckled darkly. Such noble words from a child. "But the king has made the river his own, and no one, especially a boy like you, will take it from him." As he spoke, Anazi raised his staff, and the ground beneath Naji's feet began to tremble. Dark energy swirled around the sorcerer, growing more powerful with each passing second. Naji could feel the weight of the magic pressing against him, like an invisible hand trying to crush him. But Naji had been preparing for this moment. He closed his eyes and reached deep within himself, calling upon the power of the river god. Almost immediately, a cool, soothing energy flowed through him, filling him with strength. The waters of the river began to rise, swirling around him protectively, creating a barrier between him and the dark magic. Anazi's eyes widened in surprise. "So, it's true," he muttered under his breath. "The river god's power flows through you." With a flick of his wrist, Anazi sent a bolt of dark magic toward Naji, but the waters rose higher, deflecting the attack. The sorcerer growled in frustration, summoning even more power, but Naji remained calm. He could feel the river's pulse within him, steady and strong, guiding his every move. Then, in one swift motion, Naji raised his hand, and the river surged forward, crashing toward Anazi like a tidal wave. The sorcerer barely had time to react before the water engulfed him, sweeping him off his feet and slamming him into a tree. For a moment, the forest was silent except for the sound of water rushing back into the river. Naji stood tall, his chest heaving with the effort of the battle. But as the water receded, he saw Anazi slowly rise to his feet, his black robe soaked, but his face twisted in anger. "You may have won this time, boy," the sorcerer spat, "but this is far from over. The king will not rest until you are destroyed." With those words, Anazi vanished into the shadows, leaving Naji standing alone by the river. The next morning, Ada sensed something was wrong. Naji had returned home late the night before, quiet and shaken after his encounter with Anazi. Though he tried to hide his worry, Ada knew her son too well. She decided it was time to reveal the full prophecy, the one Obinna had shared with her long ago, when she first learned of her son's destiny. Sitting by the fire, Ada beckoned Naji to join her. "There is something I have not told you," she began, her voice heavy with the weight of the truth. "When Obinna came to me the night you were conceived, he spoke of more than just your birth. He spoke of a prophecy, a path you must follow to restore balance to the land." Naji leaned in, listening carefully. "What did he say, mother?" Ada took a deep breath. "He told me that you would be born with the power to command a river, to heal the land and bring life back to our people. But your path would not be easy. There are 3 trials you must face before you can confront King Chima. Each trial will test your strength, your wisdom, and your heart." Naji frowned. 3 trials? What are they? "I do not know all the details," Ada admitted. "But Obinna warned that the first trial would come from the darkness, the sorcerer Anazi. You have already faced him, but he's not defeated yet. The second trial will come from the land itself, and the third from the heart." Naji nodded slowly, his mind racing with the weight of the prophecy. "I will face whatever comes, mother. I will not let the king destroy this land." Ada smiled sadly, pride and worry mixing in her heart. "You are strong, my son. But remember, even the strongest need help. The river god has given you gifts, but you must also rely on your own courage and the wisdom of those around you." That night, as Naji lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge was only beginning. The encounter with Anazi had shaken him, but had also shown him the power he carried inside. Still, the thought of 3 trials weighed heavily on him. What could the other 2 trials be? How would he overcome them? The following days passed uneventfully, but Naji knew that peace wouldn't last. Every morning, he returned to the river to practice his powers, honing his connection with the water and learning to control the currents with greater precision. He could now summon rain at will, and the river responded to his every command, though its flow remained weak. As he trained, strange things began to happen around the village. The trees in the forest whispered in voices only Naji could hear. The birds flew in strange patterns, circling the river before disappearing into the distance. It was as if the land itself was trying to communicate with him, guiding him toward the second trial. One afternoon, while Naji was deep in concentration by the river, a group of villagers approached him. They were led by an elderly woman named Neka, who was known for her wisdom and deep connection to the spirits of the land. "Naji," Neka called softly, her voice carrying the weight of years and knowledge. "The land speaks of you." Naji looked up in surprise. "What do you mean, Neka?" "The earth beneath our feet is stirring," Neka explained. "The spirits of the land have begun to wake. They know of your destiny, and they are calling you to face the second trial." "What is the second trial?" Naji asked, feeling a mix of curiosity and dread. Neka shook her head. "I cannot say for sure, but I know this: your connection to the land will be tested. You must listen carefully to the whispers of the earth, for they will guide you through the trial. Trust in your heart, and remember you are not alone. The spirits will help you, but only if you are willing to listen." Naji nodded, his resolve firm. "I will listen, Neka. I will not fail." And so, with the weight of the prophecy heavy on his shoulders, Naji prepared himself for the second trial, knowing that each step would bring him closer to the final confrontation with King Chima. As Naji prepared for the second trial, the air around the village seemed to grow heavier, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Every day, he would sit by the river, eyes closed, listening for the whispers of the earth that Neka had spoken of. But though he strained to hear, the voices remained faint, elusive. One evening, just as the sun was setting, Naji decided to venture deeper into the forest, to the place where the trees grew thick and the air was always cool. He had often heard stories of the ancient spirits that dwelled there, spirits that had been forgotten when the river stopped flowing. If he was to face the second trial, he needed to find them. As he walked, the forest seemed to shift around him. The trees bent slightly in his direction, as if they recognized him. The animals moved in silence, their eyes following his every step. Naji knew he was being watched, but he didn't feel fear, only a strange sense of anticipation. Finally, after what felt like hours, Naji reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone, covered in moss and vines. The ground around it was marked with symbols he didn't recognize, but something about the place felt sacred. As he approached the stone, he heard it, a soft, melodic whisper, like the wind through leaves, but with meaning. Naji. His name echoed through the clearing, spoken not by a single voice but by many. The spirits were near. He knelt before the stone, closing his eyes and opening his heart to the earth. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. "You have come for the second trial," the voices said, their tone both gentle and powerful. "We are the spirits of the land, the guardians of the earth. Long have we slept, waiting for the one who would restore balance. The river god has chosen you, but you must prove yourself worthy." Naji swallowed, his heart pounding. "I am ready. Tell me what I must do." The air around him seemed to shift, and for a moment, Naji felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. "The king's dam has choked the land," the voices said. "The earth is thirsty, and the crops have withered. To restore balance, you must awaken the spirit of the earth. But be warned, this trial will test your connection to the land. If you fail, the earth will remain barren, and your destiny will be lost." Naji nodded, determination filling his heart. "I will do whatever it takes." The whispers faded, and the ground beneath him grew still. For a moment, Naji wasn't sure what to do. But then he felt it, a deep, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat, coming from beneath the earth. It was faint at first, but as he focused on it, the pulse grew stronger. Naji placed his hands on the ground, closing his eyes and letting the pulse guide him. He could feel the earth's pain, the dryness of the soil, the hunger of the plants that had been starved of water for so long. But beneath the pain, he felt something else, life. The earth was not dead, only sleeping, waiting to be awakened. Drawing on the power of the river god within him, Naji began to focus his energy on the earth. He imagined the river flowing freely once again, its waters seeping into the soil, nourishing the land. He felt the pulse of the earth quicken in response, as if the land itself was waking up. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shook violently, and Naji opened his eyes just in time to see the large stone in the center of the clearing begin to crack. From the cracks, a faint green light emerged, spreading across the ground like veins of life. The vines around the stone began to move, slowly at first, then faster, as if they had been waiting for this moment. The earth beneath Naji's feet came alive. The green light spread across the clearing, filling the air with the scent of fresh rain and rich soil. The trees around him seemed to straighten, their leaves growing greener and fuller. The ground beneath the stone split open, and from it rose a figure, a being made of earth and vines, its body glowing with the same green light that pulsed through the ground. "You have awakened me," the spirit said, its voice deep and resonant, like the rumble of the earth itself. "I am the spirit of the earth, and I have slept for too long." Naji stood, his heart pounding in awe. "The land has been suffering," he said. "The river is dying, and the king's greed has choked the earth. I need your help to restore balance." The earth spirit regarded Naji for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You are the one the river god has chosen. I will aid you, but know this, restoring balance will not be easy. The king's magic is strong, and he has bound the land with his dark power. To break his hold, you will need more than just the river's strength. I understand, Naji said, but I will do whatever it takes. The spirit of the earth raised its hand, and from the ground sprang a small plant, its leaves glowing with the same green light. Take this, the spirit said. It is a seed of life. Plant it in the heart of the king's dam, and it will begin to weaken his hold on the land. But be careful, the king will not let you do this easily. You must be prepared for his wrath. Naji took the seed, feeling its warmth in his hand. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. I will not fail. The spirit of the earth nodded, then slowly sank back into the ground, its glowing light fading. The clearing returned to its natural state, but Naji knew that something had changed. The land was waking up, and with it, so was the power to challenge the king. As Naji made his way back to the village, the seed of life clutched tightly in his hand, he felt a new sense of purpose. The second trial had been passed, but the real challenge was still ahead. He would need to face King Chima and the dark magic that had kept the land bound for so long. But with the power of the river and the earth behind him, Naji knew he was ready. Back in the village, Naji shared what had happened in the forest with his mother, Ada. Her eyes widened with both pride and fear as he told her about the spirit of the earth and the seed of life. You've done well, my son, Ada said, her voice trembling slightly. But the king will not take this lightly. He will sense that the balance is shifting, and he will come for you. Naji nodded. I know, mother, but I can feel the power of the river and the earth inside me. I'm stronger than I was before, and I won't be facing the king alone. Ada looked at her son, her heart swelling with both pride and worry. The prophecy is unfolding, Naji. But remember, the final trial will not just be one of strength. You must also be wise. The king will use every trick he has to stop you. Naji understood. King Chima had ruled with fear and dark magic for so long that his power was deeply rooted in the land. But now, with the seed of life in his possession, Naji knew he had the means to weaken the king's hold. That night, as Naji sat by the fire, he prepared himself for the battle ahead. He would need to find a way to plant the seed in the heart of the dam without being caught by the king's guards. It would require stealth, strategy, and the full use of his powers. But Naji was ready. As the flames flickered in the darkness, Naji felt the river's pulse in his veins and the strength of the earth beneath his feet. The king's reign of greed and darkness was coming to an end, and with the power of the land and the river behind him, Naji knew he would restore balance to the kingdom. The following morning, Naji awoke before dawn. The air was crisp and cool, the sky still painted with the soft hues of early light. He gathered his things, just a small satchel, a staff for walking, and the seed of life wrapped carefully in a piece of cloth. His journey to the dam would be dangerous, but it was necessary if the land was to be saved. Ada stood at the entrance of their hut, watching her son prepare. Her face was lined with worry, but there was also pride in her eyes. Naji had grown into a strong and determined young man, and the weight of his destiny rested on his shoulders with grace. Still, the dangers ahead were immense, and as his mother, Ada's heart ached with the knowledge of what he might face. Mother, Naji said softly as he approached her, I will return. I promise. Ada smiled faintly, reaching out to touch his face. You are brave, my son, but bravery alone will not win this fight. Remember what the spirits told you. The king is clever, and his magic is powerful. You must be both strong and wise. Naji nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I will be careful, and I will return with the river flowing freely once again. Without another word, Naji turned and began his journey, walking down the familiar paths of the village and into the forest beyond. The trees stretched tall around him, their leaves whispering softly in the breeze. Naji could feel the life of the forest pulsing beneath his feet, a reminder that the spirits of the land were with him. As he walked, he thought of the dam, how it had once been a place of beauty, where the river flowed freely through the heart of the kingdom. bringing life to the land and its people. But King Chima's greed had changed everything. The dam now stood as a monument to his power, choking the river and draining the life from the earth. Naji's pace quickened. The sooner he could reach the dam, the sooner he could plant the seed of life and begin to undo the damage the king had wrought. By midday, the sun was high overhead, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Naji stopped by a small stream to drink and rest for a moment. As he knelt by the water's edge, he noticed something strange. The water here was unusually clear and cold, unlike the muddy, stagnant pools that dotted the land near the village. A smile crept across Naji's face. The river god was with him. The spirits of the water had not abandoned him, even in this barren land. He dipped his hand into the stream, feeling the cool rush of water flow through his fingers, and closed his eyes, sending a silent prayer to the river god for strength. After a few moments, Naji stood and continued on his way. The forest around him began to change as he drew nearer to the king's dam. The trees grew taller, their trunks twisted and gnarled as if they had been warped by the king's magic. The air grew thick and heavy, and the once lively sounds of the forest faded into an eerie silence. As he approached the edge of the dam, Naji felt a deep sense of unease settle over him. The dam loomed in the distance, a massive wall of stone and iron that blocked the river's natural flow. The water on one side was calm and stagnant, while on the other, the river trickled weakly through a narrow channel, barely enough to sustain the land. Naji crouched low, hiding behind a cluster of rocks as he surveyed the area. The king's guards patrolled the dam, their armor glinting in the sunlight. They carried spears and swords, their eyes sharp as they scanned the horizon for any signs of trouble. Naji's heart pounded in his chest. This would not be easy. He would need to get past the guards and reach the heart of the dam where the seed of life could be planted. But how could he do that without being seen? As he thought, Naji remembered the teachings of Neka, the healer. She had spoken of the power of the river not just as a source of strength, but as a means of movement. The river flowed around obstacles, finding its way through even the smallest cracks. Perhaps Naji could do the same. Closing his eyes, Naji focused on the flow of the river within him. He imagined himself as water, moving silently and effortlessly through the forest, unseen and unnoticed by the guards. Slowly, he felt his body grow lighter, as if the very air around him was bending to his will. When he opened his eyes, Naji was ready. He moved carefully, keeping low to the ground as he approached the dam. The guards were stationed at regular intervals, but their eyes were focused outward, scanning the forest for intruders. They did not notice the young man slipping between the shadows, moving with the grace of the river itself. Naji reached the base of the dam and paused, his heart racing. He could feel the power of the king's magic here. It radiated from the stones like a heavy heat, a dark force that pressed down on the land. But Naji also felt the seed of life pulsing in his hand, a gentle warmth that pushed back against the darkness. With a deep breath, Naji began to climb. The stones were slick with moss and water, but he moved quickly, his hands and feet finding purchase on the rough surface. The sound of the river trickling beneath him filled his ears, urging him onward. At last, Naji reached the top of the dam. The heart of the structure was just ahead, a massive stone altar where the king's dark magic was strongest. This was where the seed needed to be planted. But just as Naji took a step forward, he heard a voice behind him. Halt! Naji froze, his heart leaping into his throat. He turned slowly to see one of the king's guards standing behind him, spear raised, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What are you doing here, boy?" the guard demanded, his voice cold and sharp. Naji's mind raced. He had to think quickly. If the guard raised the alarm, his mission would be over before it even began. I came to see the dam," Naji said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I heard stories about it in the village, and I wanted to see it for myself." The guard's eyes narrowed further. "This is no place for a village boy. Leave now, before I throw you into the river." Naji swallowed hard, but he didn't move. The seed of life pulsed in his hand, a reminder of the task he had come to complete. He couldn't leave, not yet. I mean, no harm, Naji said, taking a step back. I'll go, but first, could I just take a closer look at the water? It's so beautiful here. The guard hesitated, glancing toward the river. For a moment, his suspicion wavered. The river's power was subtle, but even the guard could feel its pull, the quiet beauty of the water flowing just beyond the dam. Fine, the guard said at last, lowering his spear slightly. But be quick about it. Naji nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He moved slowly toward the edge of the dam, pretending to admire the view, all the while inching closer to the stone altar where the king's magic was concentrated. When he was close enough, Naji took a deep breath. He had only one chance. In a swift motion, he knelt and pressed the seed of life into the ground at the base of the altar, whispering a prayer to the river god. The seed glowed faintly, sinking into the earth like a drop of water into soil. Immediately, the ground beneath Naji's feet trembled. The air around him seemed to pulse with energy as the seed of life took root, beginning to push back against the dark magic that had held the land in its grip for so long. "What are you doing?" the guard shouted, realizing too late what was happening. Naji stood quickly, his heart racing. "Restoring the balance," he said, his voice strong and clear. The guard lunged at him, but Naji was faster. He darted toward the edge of the dam, leaping over the side and diving into the river below. The cold water enveloped him, and for a moment, Naji felt the full power of the river god flowing through him. As he surfaced, gasping for air, Naji saw the dam beginning to shake. The seed of life was working, weakening the stones and the king's magic with every passing moment. But the battle was far from over. Naji pulled himself onto the riverbank, his body trembling from the cold and the adrenaline rushing through his veins. He glanced back at the dam, where cracks were beginning to spread across the surface. The seed of life was doing its work, but the process would take time. Naji knew that King Chima would not sit idly by while his magic was undone. The king's dark power was vast, and now that the balance had begun to shift, he would unleash his full fury to stop Naji from completing his mission. As Naji sat catching his breath, a distant rumble echoed through the forest. The ground trembled slightly beneath him, and a cold wind began to blow. The air seemed to darken, and Naji felt a shiver of dread run down his spine. The king knew. Naji rose to his feet, wiping the water from his face. He had no time to waste. He needed to reach the heart of the kingdom and confront King Chima before the dark magic could be fully restored. But as Naji prepared to set out once more, he sensed something approaching, something dark and malevolent. As Naji stood on the riverbank, he felt a chill creep into the air, unlike anything he had felt before. The wind shifted, carrying with it a thick black fog that rolled across the land like an invading army. The trees bent and twisted as the fog approached, their branches creaking under the weight of the unnatural force. Naji's heart pounded. He knew this was no ordinary mist. This was the king's magic, a dark, living force sent to stop him. He glanced at the river, its waters now flowing more freely as the dam began to crumble, but it was not enough. The seed of life needed time to restore the balance, and the fog would surely reach him before the task was complete. Naji tightened his grip on his walking staff and began to run, his feet pounding against the wet earth as he fled the encroaching darkness. The forest around him seemed to warp and shift, as if the land itself was rebelling against the dark magic. Branches reached out like claws, and the shadows danced wildly in the corners of his vision. He pushed forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The fog was getting closer, moving faster than he could run, and soon it would engulf him. He needed to think fast. Naji's mind raced. He had no weapons strong enough to fight the king's magic directly. But perhaps he didn't need to fight it head-on. The river god's power was tied to the water, and the river itself was beginning to awaken. If Naji could reach the water in time, he might have a chance to counter the fog's power. He veered toward the river, the dark fog creeping closer with every step. His legs burned with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Just as the fog was about to overtake him, Naji leaped into the river, letting the cold water envelop him once more. For a moment, the world went silent. The rushing of the water filled his ears, drowning out the chaos of the dark magic above. Naji felt the river god's presence around him, a calming, protective force that pushed back against the king's darkness. As he surfaced, gasping for air, Naji saw the fog swirling angrily above the water's edge. It seemed confused, unable to penetrate the river's sacred flow. The fog hissed and coiled, retreating slightly as if testing the boundaries of the river's protection. Naji knew he couldn't stay in the river forever. The fog would eventually find a way around, and he had to complete his mission. But for now, he had bought himself some time. He waded toward the riverbank, keeping one eye on the fog as it writhed above him. The water had given him a momentary reprieve, but he needed more than a temporary escape. The river god's power was with him, but he had to learn how to harness it fully if he was to stop the king's magic for good. As Naji climbed onto the bank, he felt a strange sensation wash over him, a warmth that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. He knelt down, placing his hands on the ground, and closed his eyes. The river god's voice whispered in his mind, guiding him. Use the water, Naji. It flows through you as it flows through the land. You are part of it, and it is part of you. Naji took a deep breath, focusing on the river's flow. He imagined the water coursing through his veins, filling him with the strength of the river god. Slowly he stood, raising his staff high into the air. The fog surged forward, sensing the shift in power. But Naji was ready. He slammed his staff into the ground, and the river responded. With a roar, the water rose up, forming a towering wave that crashed against the fog. The dark magic hissed and sputtered as the water washed over it, pushing the fog back toward the forest. Naji stood firm, his heart racing as he watched the power of the river god sweep the darkness away. But he knew this was only a temporary victory. The fog was retreating, but it was not defeated. It would return, stronger than before, and Naji needed to be prepared. The river god's voice whispered in his mind again. You have the power within you, Naji, but you must go deeper. The river's true strength lies in the heart of the kingdom. Naji nodded, understanding what needed to be done. The dam was only the first step. He had weakened the king's hold on the land, but to fully restore the river and defeat the king's magic, he would have to confront King Chima directly. Gathering his strength, Naji turned and began his journey toward the heart of the kingdom. The fog had bought him precious time, but the final battle was still ahead. Naji trekked through the forest, his heart set on his destination, the king's palace, where Chima wielded his dark magic. The land around him began to change as he moved closer to the kingdom's center. The trees grew sparse, and the ground cracked and dry, drained of life by the dam's stranglehold on the river. But as Naji traveled deeper into the heart of the kingdom, he felt something else, a presence watching him. At first, he dismissed it as nerves, the weight of his mission pressing down on him. But the feeling grew stronger, and soon Naji could hear faint footsteps behind him, rustling the dry leaves. He stopped, gripping his staff tightly. "Who's there?" he called, his voice echoing through the silent forest. For a moment, there was no answer. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows, a tall man with dark skin and bright, piercing eyes. He wore a simple robe, but there was something regal about his bearing, something that hinted at a deeper power. "I mean you no harm," the man said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I've been watching you, Naji." Naji narrowed his eyes, his grip on his staff tightening. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "My name is Obi. I was once a guardian of the river, before the king's magic corrupted the land. I have been waiting for someone like you, a child of the river god, who could help restore the balance." Naji's heart skipped a beat. "You know about the river god?" Obi nodded. "I have served the river for many years, but when the king dammed the waters, I lost much of my power. I've been hiding, waiting for the day when the river would rise again." Naji studied Obi, sensing the truth in his words. The man carried an air of wisdom, and though he appeared unarmed, Naji could feel the river's energy flowing through him. "If you served the river, why didn't you stop the king?" Naji asked, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and frustration. Obi's smile faded, replaced by a look of sorrow. "I tried, but the king's magic is ancient and powerful. It took everything I had just to survive. But now that you've planted the seed of life, the river is beginning to flow again. Together, we can defeat the king and restore the land." Naji hesitated, his mind racing. He had been alone on this journey for so long, relying only on his mother's teachings and the guidance of the river god. But now, faced with the enormity of his task, he knew he couldn't do it alone. "All right," Naji said, lowering his staff. "We'll work together." Obi nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "Good. The king's magic is strong, but there are weaknesses in his defenses. With the river's power and the knowledge I've gathered, we can find a way to defeat him." Naji felt a surge of hope. With Obi's help, he might stand a chance against the king's dark magic. Together, they could restore the river to its natural flow and bring life back to the kingdom. But as they set off toward the palace, Naji couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was yet to come. A battle not just against the king's magic, but against the forces of darkness that had taken root in the heart of the land. After days of travel, Naji and Obi finally reached the outskirts of the kingdom's capital. The once thriving city was now a shadow of its former self. The streets were lined with beggars and starving families, their faces gone from the drought that had ravaged the land. Soldiers patrolled the streets, their eyes cold and unfeeling, enforcing the king's rule with iron fists. Naji's heart ached at the sight of the suffering people. This was the king's doing, the result of his greed and his dark magic. But Naji knew that soon it would all end. The palace loomed in the distance, a massive structure of stone and iron that towered over the city. Its walls were high and thick, and Naji could feel the pulse of dark magic emanating from within. "This is it," Obi said quietly as they approached the palace gates. "Once we enter, there will be no turning back." Naji nodded, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. He could feel the weight of his destiny pressing down on him, but he knew he couldn't back down now. The river god had chosen him for this task, and he would see it through to the end. Together, they approached the gates, where two guards stood watch. Their eyes were cold, and their expressions stern as they barred the way. "State your business," one of the guards barked, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Naji stepped forward, his voice steady. "We seek an audience with King Chima." The guards exchanged a glance, then laughed. "And who are you to demand such a thing?" Obi stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with authority. "We are here to restore balance to the land. The king's reign is at an end." The guards stopped laughing, their expressions hardening. One of them drew his sword, stepping toward Obi with a sneer. "I think it's time you learned your place, old man." But before the guard could strike, Obi raised his hand, and the ground beneath them trembled. The river's power surged through him, and the air around them crackled with energy. The guards stumbled back in shock, their swords falling from their hands. Naji felt the river's power surge through him as well, filling him with strength and confidence. He stepped forward, his voice ringing out with authority. "Let us pass or face the consequences." The guards hesitated, their faces pale with fear. They had never seen such power before, and they knew better than to challenge the will of the river. Without another word, they stepped aside, allowing Naji and Obi to pass through the gates. As they entered the palace grounds, Naji felt the weight of his task settle heavily on his shoulders. The final battle was fast approaching, and he knew that it would take everything he had to defeat the king and restore the river's flow. But with Obi by his side and the power of the river god within him, Naji felt ready. The time had come to face King Chima.